Welcome and good evening, friends. Welcome to the Unacademy platform and myself, Dr. Devesh. And today I'm going to discuss about the uh, hello, Prashant, Ansuman, Ankita. Thank you so much for wishing me. So today, as I have promised yesterday, we are going to discuss about the gastrointestinal tract, one of the very important topic where you will be getting many questions. And my gut feeling says that what I'm going to discuss today, definitely there will be one or two questions from today. What I'm going to discuss, right? So I hope for that. And now I will start with that wish, with that prayer that you all should have a great and grand success in your every exams of your life, right? So with this prayer, I would like to start my lecture, right? So as we all know that this is the course schedule which you can see, and you can join me right till the 31st. So you can see today we are going to discuss GIT. Yesterday we have discussed about the CNS pathology, and tomorrow we will be discussing about the liver pathology, right? So let's start with the good wishes to you all. This is the number one question. Thank you, Mahesh. Thank you, Mahesh, for such a lovely word. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Very good. I think Naveen Kumar is already right. He has identified. Can you tell me what will be the right answer for this question? See, this history is 54-year-old male analyzed for the upper GI discomfort because of the heartburn. See, the history is of heartburn from the past 2 months. Right now, what examiner is saying: endoscopy, double contrast esophagogram, and the biopsy. These are the three form, right? So you can see this is the endoscopy, this is the double contrast esophagogram, and this is the biopsy. So these are the three things given into your exam, and examiner will be asking you what will be right answer. Right. So very good. Many of you have given the right answer. I would like to see the poll here. How many of you think that what should be the correct answer for this question? Just you have few seconds. Can you give me the answer for this question? Yes. Very good. So what I am seeing, majority of you have given the right answer only, right? So this is a pure case of the allergic esophagitis. Remember, allergic esophagitis is also known as feline esophagus. Remember, this is also known as feline esophagus, right? So that is very important to understand. And feline esophagus is also called as eosinophilic esophagitis. It is also known as eosinophilic esophagitis, right? So these are the various names for the allergic esophagitis, right? What examiner had used in exam, AIMS exam, was the feline esophagus. What I did, I have just changed the name of the feline esophagus. I kept the name allergic esophagitis to check the knowledge of the student that they know this or they don't know, right? So now it's clear the patient is coming with the heartburn, right? Patient will be having a problem like this. So I will explain you this question one by one, right? Why answer is feline esophagus, right? Feline esophagus is most commonly associated with eosinophilic esophagitis. That was the answer in that AIMS exam, right? So this was the question in AIMS exam. Feline esophagus is most commonly associated with eosinophilic esophagitis, and remember, it is more commoner than gastroesophageal reflux disease, right? So that was the two closer option. Why examiner had asked? Earlier time they used to say that it is GERD which is most commonly, right? But this is the latest update where it says eosinophilic esophagitis is the real reason for the feline esophagus, right? So feline esophagus, you will be seeing patient will be coming with difficulty in swallowing, right? So he will be having difficulty in swallowing and heartburn, as you can see in this presentation, right? So because of the heartburn, many patient, many students, they started thinking that it should be a GERD. Remember, it is heartburn is a very vague phenomena, and it can be seen in the inflammation of the esophagus and can be because of anything. So this is because of eosinophilic infiltrate. Remember, this is because of eosinophilic infiltrate into the mucosa and submucosa of the esophagus, right? So that is important point we have to understand. What happens in feline esophagus? There is a eosinophilic infiltrate into the mucosa and submucosa. Because of this eosinophilic infiltrate, what will happen? When you will see the esophagoscopy or endoscopy, see what you will see on endoscopy. In endoscopy, see what has happened. Our normal esophageal mucosa, when you will see gross appearance, this will be smooth, right? That will be smooth. That will be smooth. But because of the inflammation, there will be concentric thickening of the mucosa. So there will be concentric thickening, right? So why there is a concentric thickening? So what I am showing you here, this is how you will see on endoscopic examination. See, on endoscopic examination, you will see there is a concentric thickening of mucosa and submucosa of esophagus. Why? Because of the eosinophilic infiltrations, right? So because of eosinophilic infiltration, you are having this kind of presentation on endoscopy, right? So because of the inflammation, what will happen? The mucosa will be swollen up, right? Mucosa will be swollen up and they will be edematous. So because of that, they will take a characteristic appearance. That edematous swollen esophageal mucosa will be giving characteristic appearance which you often see in the feline esophagus, means cat's esophagus, which you see. That is why it is called as feline esophagus, right? And this process, remember, when you are seeing this, look at this diagram. See, this is the picture. Now you can see this is the picture of the endoscopy, where we can see there is a thickening. Can you notice these are the thickening because of the, these are the concentric thickening, right? These are the concentric thickening I was telling you, and this is all because of the eosinophilic infiltrate, right? So this is looking like a trachea also. So that is why this is also called as trachealization of the esophagus. Remember, examiner may use the word trachealization of esophagus. So trachealization of esophagus, feline esophagus, all these things are because of the eosinophilic infiltrate. They are infiltrating into this, right? So that is why endoscopy is showing this finding. So did you understand why I was explaining this much here? So that we can understand why it is called as feline esophagus, because cat's esophagus will be looking like this, and normally what you will see is the trachea will be looking like this. That is why it is also called as trachealization of the esophagus, right? So how is this different from like I have actually I don't have idea how is this different, because endoscopy you can ask other people, right? Those who are specialists of this medicine people, right? So I'm just telling you what you will be seeing here, right? So here you are seeing, you can say that it is circular and plica it can be, but I don't know whether we should use the term for this. I have never heard this term when I read this thing, right? So I actually don't have any idea of that thing, right? So if you look at the double contrast esophagogram, so now you can see this is the double contrast esophagogram which was shown in that picture, right? So double contrast esophagogram, what you are noticing that, can you see these are the radiolucent folds, right? So what I am showing you, these are the radiolucent folds, right? So these are the radiolucent folds which you are seeing the concentric thickening. Now it is looking like a fold. And if you look at the fold, how is the appearance? I'm just showing, they are making one angle to the, making one angle to the mid part of the esophagus. This is the mid part of the esophagus. Remember, this is the mid portion of the esophagus, right? This is the mid portion of the esophagus, and mid portion of the esophagus, you can see they are converging and they are making one angle. Can you see this? This is making one angle like this. This is making one angle like this. So this is like this, right? What you are seeing, it is a tiles, and this kind of pattern is called as herringbone pattern. This is called as herringbone pattern. So double contrast esophagogram, this herringbone pattern is again because of the concentric thickening of the mucosa, right? So these are the two things which are not related to the pathologist, but we will be seeing these report and we will correlate these things. So when we are seeing this kind of esophageal endoscopy, there is a trachealization or feline, and double contrast is saying there is a herringbone pattern. So what we will do, we will take the biopsy from these areas. We will do the biopsy from these areas, and in biopsy, now you can see this is the esophageal biopsy, right? And what you are noticing, if you compare, always remember rule of 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 5 areas you have to grossly you have to check, and then you will notice, and then you will suddenly notice that this area which I'm making with the green color, this area is having so many cells. They are having so many cells with eosinophilic cytoplasm, and actually these are eosinophilic inflammation, right? So there is a eosinophilic inflammation. So esophageal biopsy showing eosinophilic inflammation. So what will be the future question in AIIMS exam? When you can confirm the diagnosis? See, this diagnosis can be confirmed by a pathologist. Remember this point. Even the radiologist will be telling this is this, and gastrologist will be telling that this is this, but the biopsy is the conclusive thing. That is why I took this topic, right? Biopsy will be conclusive. How you are going to confirm? When you are seeing more than 15 eosinophil per high power field, and that will be our future question in AIMS exam. Remember. So that is why I wanted to discuss. Examiner can ask you this question. Number one, feline esophagus is most commonly associated with eosinophilic esophagitis, right? And how you will confirm the diagnosis? When you see more than 15 eosinophils per high power field, this will confirm the diagnosis, right? So that is how you can solve this question. Now come to the question again. What about the other option? It cannot be GERD, right? So that is true, right? And it cannot be Barrett's esophagus, because Barrett's esophagus you will be seeing squamous to columnar metaplasia, and esophageal adenocarcinoma you will be having very weird large hyperchromatic cells with hyperchromatic nuclei, with large bizarre cells with hyperchromatic nuclei. So these are all things are ruled out, right? Here I would like to tell you about the Barrett's esophagus. Already we know so many things about the Barrett's esophagus. You can see this is the picture of Barrett's esophagus, right? So this is the Barrett's esophagus. So what you see in Barrett's esophagus, now I am showing you here. See, this area is the lower part of the esophagus, right? This area which I am showing you, this is the lower part of the esophagus, where you are seeing all these are elongated cells. Can you see? These are all elongated or flat cells, right? So what are these cells? These are squamous cells. These are squamous cells, right? Because of the gastroesophageal reflux disease, gastroesophageal reflux disease is the most common cause of Barrett's esophagus, right? This is the most common cause of Barrett's esophagus. Remember this for MCQ point of view. So because of the gastroesophageal reflux, acidic food is coming up, esophageal mucosa will be having stress, and because of this stress, squamous cell, now you can see when you are coming down, right, on the lower part here, you can notice there are group of cells which I am encircling here, right? These are group of cells where you can see these are tall cells, columnar cells. These are columnar cells, right? So these are columnar cells, and they are having mucin filled goblet. So they are having mucin filled vacuoles. So that is why these columnar cells are called as goblet cells, right? So these columnar cells are called as goblet cell. So what I am showing you here in this diagram, we are noticing squamous cell is replaced by columnar, and that is why Barrett's esophagus is called as columnar metaplasia. Remember, this is the columnar metaplasia. No, it is not already present. Remember, it's not, yes, it's not already present. You will never find columnar epithelium like this, right? So once you see, start seeing in the esophagus, there is a columnar epithelium, then it will be Barrett's esophagus, right? So here we have to understand this point. This is the columnar metaplasia we are seeing in the lower part of the esophagus, because there is a squamous is getting transformed. And remember, what is the characteristic? Yes, if you are having confusion, or if we are having any confusion, then we will look for this goblet cell. Once you find the goblet cells in the these columnar cells, that will confirm the diagnosis. Remember, because goblet cells are normally never seen in the normal esophagus, right? So that is the catch point. Goblet cells means that mucin containing cells, right? So that is how you will see the Barrett's esophagus, right? When we have this kind of confusion, as Yash had asked me, sir, that columnar cell is already present. So maybe the lower part may be having some area of the stomach where you will be having columnar cell, but you will not be seeing the goblet cells, right? So how you can confirm this? This is the goblet cell, right? You have to take the special stain. This is the mucin, which you are seeing in blue color, right? And name of this stain is Alcian blue stain, right? So Alcian blue stain is used for mucin, right? And remember, this Alcian blue stain will be acidic pH, right? So they will be having acidic pH. So now you can see all these are the goblet cells and vacuoles which are containing mucin. So all these which I'm marking is all these are the mucin only, right? And remember, this will be acidic pH because it is acidic food which is coming up. So it will be acidic pH which will be showing the Barrett's esophagus, right? So now we have seen Barrett's esophagus. What is the risk of Barrett's esophagus? Adenocarcinoma of esophagus. So remember this point also, right? And remember this point also. Barrett's esophagus is a metaplasia, which is a kind of a cellular adaptation. So it will be a completely reversible condition. So Barrett's esophagus is completely reversible condition, right? So this point also we have to keep in mind for future exam. Mucicarmine and PAS can be used to stain. Yes, we can use mucicarmine and PAS also, but this is the best stain which we are seeing here, right? Now we can see the next one. This question is another important future MCQ which examiner may ask. What is the pH value? Don't ask me this smaller question. pH value will be 2.5. Acidic pH, it can be any pH. Acidic pH will be used for the Barrett's esophagus. Alkaline 7.5 will be used for the intestinal goblet cells, right? Fine. So now coming to the this question, giant cell hypertrophy. Can you see this? Giant hypertrophy of the gastric mucosa. See, this question is giant hypertrophy of the gastric mucosa is similar to the brain surface, and this is the catch point. So what is your answer? Similar to the brain surface, what will be your answer for this question? Can you tell me? It's a timeline I have given to you, and just give a poll, and let me see how many of you are giving the correct answer. Very good. So 90. I want to see this. I want to wait for that, right? So now you can see I have seen majority of the people have given the right answer. This is the Menetrier's disease, right? This is the Menetrier's disease. It cannot be GERD. It cannot be carcinoma stomach, right? And chronic gastritis is also ruled out. So this giant hypertrophy is the catchword. Remember, giant hypertrophy is the catchword, and brain surface like appearance is the feature of the Menetrier's disease. Menetrier's disease is usually, I will just explain you a few points about this. Menetrier's disease is usually because of the transforming growth factor alpha. Remember, this cytokine will act on the stomach cells, and there will be a rugal hypertrophy, right? So this rugal hypertrophy or hyperplasia, I should not say hypertrophy, this is a misnomer, right? This is hyperplasia. So this rugal hyperplasia is there, and because of the rugal hyperplasia, what will happen? There will be loss of protein here, right? There will be loss of protein, right? So that patient will be having decreased albumin. That is why when you will see his blood examination, he will be having decreased albumin in his blood, right? And that is why it is also called as protein losing gastropathy, right? That is why it is also called as protein losing gastropathy. Remember, it is TGF alpha which is acting on the gastric rugal folds and causing hyperplasia of the rugae. So because of the hyperplasia, they will become very big. They will become very big, and that will be looking like a brain surface, right? So these rugal folds will be looking like a surface of the brain, right? So that is the characteristic feature of the Menetrier's disease. See, as a clinician, you will be a clinician. Now you are facing you are seeing a stomach where you are seeing such a big giant hypertrophy of the rugal folds are there, and now you understood that is Menetrier's disease. So why you are worried about this patient? Can you tell me? This is the clinical correlation. Why you are worried? Very nice. Shantanu is telling this patient will be having risk of gastric adenocarcinoma. That is why a clinician is worried. So this can be also a future question, right? Gastric adenocarcinoma. Examiner may ask question like this also. Menetrier's disease is a precancerous lesion. So yes, answer will be yes. Menetrier's disease can cause cancer, and that is the gastric adenocarcinoma, right? So this is the predisposing factor for the gastric adenocarcinoma. Now I will be showing you this diagram. So now you can see this picture. If I don't say that it is a esophagus, definitely you will be saying that it is a brain surface, right? So brain surface like appearance, if you are seeing in a stomach area, so remember you are seeing a Menetrier's disease, right? So this is called as Menetrier's disease, right? So because of the hyperplasia, as I said, there is a hyperplasia of the glands which are present in the stomach, and that will be beautifully seen in the microscopic examination. So this is the microscopic examination. When you will take the section, can you see usually glands will be of this much length, right? Usually, but now you can see they had been branched, and they are so much branched, and now they are getting a very bigger. Can you see there is a very big, right? So big and branching. So this is called as foveolar hyperplasia. So what I'm showing you here, it is looking like a leaf. That is why it is called as foveolar hyperplasia, right? So now I sum it up. What will be the three important things you have to remember? Menetrier's disease, number one, is because of the cytokine TGF alpha, not beta. Remember, TGF alpha, not beta. Examiner can ask you this question because we know that TGF beta is most fibrogenic, but here it is TGF alpha, right? This will stimulate foveolar epithelial cell in the stomach. Because of that, there will be increase in rugal fold thickness, which will be looking like a brain, right? So it is foveolar hyperplasia, which is giving a brain surface like appearance on the gross examination. When you take the section from those area, you will be seeing there is a foveolar hyperplasia, leaf like hyperplasia of the gland will be there. So this is called as foveolar hyperplasia, right? So this is the Menetrius disease. And what is the risk? Why a clinician is worried? This patient can be a future patient for the adenocarcinoma, right? Gastric adenocarcinoma. Coming to this question, this is another very good healthy MCQ. I expect this to be a future aims question. Believe me, I expect this to be a future aims question. See, the history is quite classical. In this history, you can see there is a 59-year-old man. He is having vomiting, and try to answer this if you read this right before that. For 5 months, there is a upper GI endoscopy showing erythematous area of the mucosa and thickening of the rugal folds, right, in the gastric antrum area. See, what is this? Gastric antrum area. Microscopic appearance is shown here, right? And this is the special stain. This is the microscopic, this is the special stain. So what is your answer? What will be the factor responsible for this gastric mucosal pathology? Why this is there? What is causing this kind of damage? Can you tell me? Right. So that is very important. See, this question answer is very nice, very good. So majority of you have given the right answer only. Answer is cytotoxin associated gene A, which is also called as CAG-A gene, present in which bacilli? Can you see? Bacilli is here, which is visible. So it is because of H. pylori, right? So this is because of H. pylori. H. pylori. Yes, stain, I will tell you. Don't worry, Mahesh. I'm going to tell all things, right? I'm just telling you about this question. All these things are not responsible for this kind of presentation. See, why did you say that CAG? The question is why you have chosen, why I'm saying that this is not possible. Why I said this is not possible? Because I am seeing something here which is very characteristic, which is very characteristic. See this. Now I'm showing you the exact biopsy here, the bigger view. And as I was telling you, what I am seeing here, there is a big mononuclear infiltrate, or you can see this green color, what I'm showing you, these are the lymphocytic infiltrate. These lymphocytic infiltrates are forming lymphoid aggregate. They are forming lymphoid aggregate, and they are creating germinal center like a lymph node, right? So you can say in a simple word, when you find a lymph node like appearance in the gastric mucosa, so this is the gastric mucosa, right? So what I'm showing you, this is the gastric mucosa biopsy, right? Gastric mucosa biopsy. Remember this point. When a patient is coming with patient is coming with the gastric discomfort, right? As I have given in this history, and when you see the biopsy, and biopsy is having lymphoid aggregates, lymph node like. When you are seeing gastric mucosa is looking like a lymph node. Remember, this is the way we have been taught in our MD pathology, right? When you are seeing lymphoid aggregate, which is looking like a lymph node, when you are seeing gastric mucosa is like a lymph node, it means it is characteristic of H. pylori infection, right? So lymphoid infiltrate forming the germinal center, this is suggestive of H. pylori infection, right? So this is characteristic. Remember, this can be MCQ also in future exam. What is the characteristic on the microscopic examination of the H. pylori infection? So characteristic is the lymphoid aggregate with germinal center. So what is characteristic? Lymphoid aggregate with germinal center. So this is the characteristic finding. Remember what I have written, this is the characteristic finding, right? So we are seeing a lymphoid aggregate, but remember, it can be a initiation of the lymphoma also. So we now want to confirm that. You remember? So now we want to confirm this biopsy is the H. pylori only. So for confirmation of this, we are going to use a special stain. Right? This was the question in NEET 2016. What are the special stain we use for H. pylori infection? So now I am showing you there are two special stains, right? This one and this one. This one is the silver stain, which is called as Warthin-Starry stain. Warthin-Starry stain. It is a silver-based stain, right? It is a silver-based stain where you can see curvilinear See, it is curvilinear because H. pylori is curvilinear bacteria, right? H. pylori is a curvilinear bacteria, so they will be looking like this, spiral or curvilinear appearance, right? So this is the silver stain, and this is the non-silver stain. So now you have to understand there are two types of stain we are using: silver and non-silver. Silver and non-silver. So this blue stain, which is non-silver, is the Giemsa or gymnase. This is Giemsa one stain, and there is another name which had been asked in All India exam, that is called as gymnase. So Giemsa and gymnase, these are the two stain we are using for the H. pylori detection. And here you can see H. pylori is at the surfaces. You can see these are all so many tiny blue color, small blue color appearance. These are all H. pylori infection, right? So here it is black in color because it is silver stain, and here it will be blue in color, right? So blue spiral bacteria will be there. So this will be biopsy. So this is how we are seeing lymphoid aggregate. Then we are doing the special stain, and we will identify the H. pylori infection, right? So H. pylori, what they are causing here? What they are causing? See, remember H. pylori is associated with chronic gastritis. Just two words I want to tell you. Chronic gastritis is because of H. pylori and can be because of autoimmune. These are the two important etiology I wanted to let you know that, right? So autoimmune and H. pylori, these are the two important chronic gastritis. Most common type is the H. pylori induced gastritis, right? Remember, I'm just trying to correlate few things here so that you should not commit those silly mistakes during exam, right? H. pylori is most common type, right? Autoimmune, A for autoimmune, and this is also known as type A gastritis. So type A gastritis is autoimmune, right? And what is remaining? H. pylori is type B gastritis. So remember this point also, examiner sometime ask, right? What is type B gastritis? It is H. pylori, right? And what is the most common site? Most common site for H. pylori induced gastritis is the antrum. This was the previous year question also in NEET exam. Antrum is the most common site. Remember, antrum is the most common site. Why I wanted to let you know all these things? Remember one thing, this chronic gastritis is a reason for the gastric adenocarcinoma. Reason for the gastric adenocarcinoma. So what is the most common cause of gastric adenocarcinoma? So answer will be H. pylori, right? So H. pylori will be most common cause, right? Yes, very good. Yes, it is antral predominant because antrum is the area where H. pylori will be living, right? So H. pylori is the most common. So can you tell me what will be the most common site for the gastric adenocarcinoma if H. pylori is the most common cause? That was the previous year NEET PG question. What is the most common site for the gastric adenocarcinoma if it is caused by H. pylori, right? The same area where it was causing. Yes, right answer. This is the antrum, right? Antrum is also on the lesser curvature. So these are the some of the important MCQ which examiner asked, right? Right. So we have seen this simple brief introduction about the H. pylori. Now come to the pathology. Why H. pylori will be causing disease? What makes them pathogenic? They are normally present in our antrum. They are normally inhabiting in our antrum. But what makes them pathological? Means what is the pathogenic reason? Pathogenic reason for H. pylori, right? So number one, they have flagella, right? So if you see the H. pylori, their one end will be having numerous flagella. This is called Lophotrichus bacilli, right? So flagellated, so there they gives movement to them. And what is more important is the, see that gastric area is acidic. Gastric area is acidic, right? So acidic pH will not allow them to survive, right? So what they require, they need a buffer. So they have a urease. Urease will emit urea, right? It will form urea, and this urea will be giving buffer. This urea will be forming buffer, which is required for survival of this bacteria, right? So urease is responsible for the pathogenesis of the stomach, and it is associated with which infection? That was the NEET PG question in 2018, right? H. pylori is causing disorder because of the urease, because acidic environment is not going to allow them. But when they are releasing more urease, this will split the urea, they will form the ammonia, and they will create the alkaline pH. so that they can survive. That is why I wrote they will be having buffer, and that will be helping them to survive, right? So that is how it will be there. And there are another important thing that is called as adhesin protein, which helps them to adhere in our gastric mucosa. And the last thing, the toxin, here I'm writing, they have toxins which will be causing epithelial damage, and these are the two toxins: CAG-A toxin, which I have written cytotoxicity associated toxin, that is CAG-A, and vacuolar toxin VAC-A. So these are the two toxins which will be causing pathology in H. pylori infection, right? So I think it's clear to everyone. H. pylori is the most common cause of the chronic gastritis type B. Most common site is antrum, and H. pylori is the reason for the gastric adenocarcinoma. That is why most common site for gastric adenocarcinoma is also antrum, lesser curvature site. And why they are causing all these things? Because of these pathogenic features: flagella, urease, adhesin, and the toxins CAG-A, VAC-A, which is causing all these damages, right? So now coming back to the question, now you can see why I said answer is this one. It is clear cut, because we are seeing lymphoid aggregate. So biopsy, lymphoid aggregate with germinal center in stomach area, most likely it is H. pylori. When we have this kind of suspicion, what we will do? We will go for the special stain, right? Silver stain and Giemsa stain. So now you can see this is how you will confirm this. These are the H. pylori infection. Spiral bacilli or cork screw shaped bacilli you will be seeing in the mucosal border. They will be hanging, right? So this is how we will confirm the diagnosis of H. pylori. Now coming to the another good question. Look at this MCQ. 40-year-old male, right? And give me the answer in between, right? If you are able to read the entire question before me, right? Gastric mass is there. Resected specimen was analyzed and shown below. So this is the gastric mass, and resected specimen is shown here. It's very classical. That is why I have not given any another history, right? So can you tell me what should be the right answer here? B, gastric adenocarcinoma diffuse type. Yes, very good. So give your effort. Definitely it is not just because there is a characteristic thing. Yes, very good. Very good. Amit is telling the punch line. Amit and Jaydeep, Uzma, Mahesh, all are telling the correct answer here. Remember, this is the diffuse type of the gastric adenocarcinoma. Just will be having different appearance. I will be discussing this later on in the end, right? Squamous cell carcinoma, you will be seeing a tumor cell, and tumor cell, sorry, I had made with the blue color, tumor cell, and within the tumor cell, you will be seeing concentric keratin pulse, right? So that is not present here. You will be seeing keratin pulse and squamous cells, which is not seen in this case, right? Here, what you are seeing, so many vacuolated area. Here you are seeing so many vacuolated area. This is the cell, right? And in this vacuolated area, you might be noticing that nucleus has been pushed to the periphery. Nucleus had been pushed to the periphery because of the vacuoles, right? And this kind of appearance is called as signet ring appearance, right? And signet rings are commonly associated with the diffuse type of gastric adenocarcinoma. Remember this point. Signet ring is commonly associated with diffuse type of gastric adenocarcinoma. So this question answer will be gastric adenocarcinoma diffuse type. Intestinal type, you will be seeing a gland. You know how you will recognize a gland? There will be a lumen, right? There will be a lumen, and tumor cells will be around the lumen. Tumor cells will be around the lumen. This is how you will identify the gland, right? And this will be the feature which you will see in any adenocarcinoma. Wherever you will see adenocarcinoma, there will be glandular pattern, there will be a lumen, and tumor cells will be surrounding them. So this is the answer, signet ring, right? Now I'm going to show you some of the important images. See, this image is not that, if it is not that clear to you, right, where you cannot appreciate, oh sorry, see what I have shown you here. This is the big cell, right? And there is a vacuole. This vacuole is pushing the nucleus to one end. Remember, this vacuole is pushing nucleus to the one end. That is why it is looking like a signet ring, right? That is why it is looking like a signet ring. So I will show you. This is the another diagram. This is a very good diagram. You can see here is the ring, here is the ring, and you can see these are the beautiful signet ring cells, beautiful signet ring cells where nucleus has been pushed to the periphery, right? Nucleus has been pushed to the periphery. Yes, the signet ring appearance can be because of the vacuole pushing, or it can be because of the mucin which is pushing the, remember, suppose I am showing you this is the cell. Sometime this can be a mucin also which is pushing the cell to the periphery. Remember, it is mucin which is pushing the nucleus to the periphery. So because of the mucin, you can see here mucin is very clearly visible. In earlier diagram, mucin was not visible, right? So now we can see because of the mucin that nucleus has been pushed to the one side and they are giving signet ring appearance, right? So this is the characteristic of the signet ring appearance. And signet ring appearance will be seen in diffuse type of gastric adenocarcinoma, right? So diffuse type of gastric adenocarcinoma, you will see signet ring appearance, right? Now you can see this is the intestinal type of gastric adenocarcinoma. See, it is intestinal type of gastric adenocarcinoma. So why I am saying intestinal type? Now you can appreciate. Now you can appreciate very easily. Can you see these are the lumens? Can you see these are the lumens? These are the lumens, and you can see this is the normal lumen, right? So if you see this is the lumen. Now you can see how is the size of the lumen. They are so variable, so branching, and if you look at the nucleus, they are looking very fiery, they are looking angry. We call them as angry looking nuclei because they are hyperchromatic and they are so much crowded, right? So what we are seeing here, hyperchromatic and overcrowded nuclei, hyperchromatic, overcrowded nuclei. So these are the two findings which you will find that this will be seen in intestinal gastric adenocarcinoma. In this, what you are noticing, glandular pattern is there, right? Glandular pattern is there. Here, before I move to the next question, I would like to tell you a few important points about the gastric adenocarcinoma. Gastric adenocarcinoma is the most common epithelial cancer of stomach. This was the previous year NEET question. Most common epithelial cancer of the stomach is the gastric adenocarcinoma. Most common site is the antrum. Already we have discussed, right? Now what I want to tell you here, a very important thing, there is a entity called familial gastric adenocarcinoma. This is the another important NEET question. It is associated with which gene mutation? That is the very important MCQ. Remember, this is the most common gene mutation seen in the familial gastric adenocarcinoma, right? CDH1 gene. Remember, gene is CDH1, and this gene will be encoding which protein? That is called E-cadherin, right? So this is the most common gene. So because of this, what will happen? There will be acantholysis and tumor cells will be separated from each other. And E-cadherin is for holding two cells together. Now they are broken up because of this one. So CDH1 gene, E-cadherin is associated with gastric adenocarcinoma, right? So this point I wanted to tell you here. Right now, we will move to the next question. Beautiful MCQ, and examiner will be asking question like this in your exam, right? What we are seeing here, it is a 32-year-old slum dweller. This was AIMS question, remember, with complaints of abdominal pain, diarrhea, weight loss. See, abdominal pain, diarrhea, weight loss. And what is this? It is a small intestine biopsy. It was showing histopathological feature and is here. So can you give me your answer here in this poll? I want to see that how many of you are giving the right answer. This was the older AIMS question also. Very nice. Some of the students are giving the description also. Very good. So majority of, I'm very happy, 64% means majority of people are saying the right answer. And don't worry, after this discussion, all will be taking the correct answer in any exam for this particular question, right? So here it is not entamoeba. Why it is not entamoeba, I will tell you later on, right? What we are seeing, actually I wanted to tell you the direct thing. If you are looking in this biopsy, can you notice all these cells? Okay, I will show you on the next slide. Now look at this one. What I am showing you here, this cell, this number one I am drawing here. This is like a pear shape. So this I will write it is a pear shape appearance. Right now I am marking this one. Can you see this is also number one? This is also number one. Right now these are the These are the number two. Number two, if I am making this cell is looking like a sickle shape or comma shape. So this is sickle shape or comma shape. So this pear shape, sickle shape or comma shape appearance when you see in this kind of a patient, these are the trophozoites. Remember, what are these? These are the trophozoites of Giardia lamblia, right? So these are the trophozoites of the Giardia. See, if you see the trophozoite in microscopy smear, you will be seeing trophozoites are the pear shape and they will be like this and they are having two nucleus, right? So this is the microscopic examination in the smear, right? When you are seeing the microbiology smear, you will be seeing like this. But when you are looking at the histopathology examination, remember, when you are seeing the histopathological examination, then you will be having this kind of appearance. See, this is pear shape. This is the front view, right? We take the photograph. Front view photograph will be pear shape. Remember, this is the front view, right? And when you will be seeing them from the side view will be like a sickle shape or comma shape. So that is why I was pointing this is the pear shape. I was saying this is the pear shape, and this is I was telling this sickle shape, right? So that is how you will identify the binucleated trophozoite, where you will not see the nuclei here, right? In the biopsy, you will not appreciate the nuclei. You will just see pear shape, or you will just see comma shape organism, and there will be history of this like abdominal pain, diarrhea, and remember their immunity will be down and they will be suffering from the immunodeficiency disorder, right? So they will be having immunodeficiency disorder also, right? So it will be majority primary immunodeficiency, but remember it can be associated with HIV also, right? So primary or HIV associated deficiency can be there. So they will be having immunodeficiency. Why I am saying that? Because these patient these patient, yes, they can have fatty diarrhea also, because they will be giving rise to malabsorption, right? They will be giving rise to malabsorption. They will be causing damage of the small intestine villi, and that will lead to malabsorption. This will be giving fatty stool, or you can say steatorrhea, right? So this is how you will identify GRDS: immunocompromised individual, long lasting diarrhea, abdominal pain, small intestine biopsy. You are seeing sickle shape or comma shape structure, it means it is a giardiasis, right? Now come to the entamoeba. How you are going to identify entamoeba infection? How we are going to identify entamoeba infection? Now I'm going to tell you. This is the entamoeba. See, this is the entamoeba infection, right? Entamoeba, if you see, there are some important MCQ. Most common site is the cecum. Remember, this is the most common site is the cecum, and you will see the ulcer. In this ulcer will be flask shape like this. So cecum will be showing flask shape ulcer. So flask shape ulcer, this will be the appearance, right? Which examiner ask in exam, right? And now on microscopic examination, what will be the characteristic finding? Right, when you will see entamoeba trophozoite, you will see that they are like a macrophage. So this is how we will describe macrophage like, and they will be having prominent nucleoli. They will be having prominent nucleoli, and in this trophozoite you may see fragments of the WBC, sorry, fragments of the RBCs. So these are the RBCs fragment. So these are the 3 points. Remember, these are the 3 points you will see in entamoeba. Number one, see what I have described. Number one, macrophage like appearance. Number two, prominent nucleoli. Prominent nucleoli, right? And number three, this is the ingestion of the RBC. This is called as erythrophagocytosis. Erythrophagocytosis, right? So whenever examiner gives a history of the malabsorption or diarrhea, here also you will see steatorrhea. Here also you will be seeing steatorrhea. 18 to 20 nanometer size, Vikesh, it will be difficult to say on the microscopic exam how you are going to measure, right? So closer view, it's a high power view, it is theoretical point, but we are talking about the practical point when the microscopic slide is in front of you, right? So how we are going to identify? So microscopic examination, three things you have to look for, right? They are macrophage like trophozoites, prominent nucleoli, and erythrophagocytosis. So let us see, examine this one, right? You look at this one, right? You look at this one. So what we are seeing, there is a prominent nucleoli, and you can see this one also. There are RBC fragment also. You can see RBC fragment is also there. So that is why they are looking, and all are, can you see, all are looking like a macrophage. They are all looking like a macrophage. That is the classy feature. Whenever you will see the biopsy of the cecum, you will find that there is a macrophage. They are full of macrophage like organism. Then second thing you will look for, immediately you look for the erythrophagocytosis, because that will be more prominent. Remember, which is seen here. So all are showing erythrophagocytosis. You can see all are showing erythrophagocytosis. Nearly all antamoeba here is showing erythrophagocytosis. And remember, whatever I am showing you here in intestine, this will be seen in entire human body. Whether you are seeing a liver, whether you are seeing the brain entamoeba or acanthamoeba, everywhere this will be the appearance. Liver, brain, intestine, everywhere macrophage like organism, prominent nucleoli, erythrophagocytosis. That's all. Diagnosis is done. This is the entamoeba, right? Now come to the so giardiasis is the answer, as I have told you. Entamoeba cannot be answered. Whipple's disease will be having different. Remember, celiac disease can't diagnose, or we can't confirm diagnosis on biopsy only. This is another important MCQ, because there is all non-specific findings. So we cannot do this. So already it is ruled out. So remember this point, celiac disease, you can never confirm by biopsy only. For that, you require serological investigation, then biopsy, then history, right? So there are three things we have to do, right? So why now we have seen why not entamoeba. Now why not it is Whipple's disease? Why not this is Whipple's disease, right? So what will be the appearance of the Whipple's disease? So now we can see this is the appearance of the Whipple's disease, right? So these are the two images you have to understand Whipple's disease, which was previous year AIMS question, right? Which was previous year AIMS question. So how I am going to explain you Whipple's disease? In Whipple's disease, what you are going to observe, it is caused by a bacteria which is called as Trophairima whippelii, right? So that we all know that the causative organism is Trophairima whippelii, right? So Trophairima whippelii is causing this disorder, right? And what you will see in the intestine, lamina propria, right? In mucosa, you will see lamina propria. So this is the mucosal area, right? This is the mucosal area where you will be seeing the organism. So when you are seeing the organism, see, this is the lamina propria I am drawing here, right? Lamina propria I'm drawing here, right? And this side I am showing you HE section. So this one I will show HE section, and here I will show you the pars staining, right? So I'm just going to demonstrate you something here, which is very interesting, which is very conceptual. So what happens in the lamina propria, you will notice they are full of macrophages. So foamy macrophages will be there. So that's all. You will not see any other things. That's all. You will just see foamy macrophages are present in lamina propria. Lamina propria. So lamina propria is full of foamy macrophage. Then you will have suspicion. See, patient will be coming with malabsorption. Whipple's disease is again and again a malabsorption syndrome, right? So they will be coming with malabsorption feature. Steatorrhea will be there, and you will be seeing a biopsy. Biopsy will be showing macrophage, right? What is the reason now why we are doing this pars stain? Why we are doing this pars stain? Because now I want to show you one important thing. This is the macrophage, right? Macrophage will be having lysosome. Macrophage will be having lysosome. So this is the lysosome, and inside this lysosomes, these bacterias are there, right? So these bacilli are there inside the lysosome. So remember, this is the bacilli, right? This is the one view I wanted to give you, so that you can understand clearly what we are going to do now, right? So we are seeing macrophage. Why macrophage is there? Because they have ingested all the bacilli, and they are all inside the lysosome of the macrophage, right? So what we have to do now, we will do the pars stain. Pars stain is used for which substance? Glycogen. Remember, pars is used for glycogen. Pars is used for glycogen, and what will be color of glycogen? Glycogen will be red in color. So that is why they will be showing red color like this, right? So they will be showing so much of red color. Probably these are all inside the macrophages. These are all macrophages, red color. All macrophages, red color, right? But what is the problem? What is the problem? Problem is the glycogen is normally present in our intestine, right? Because we are having digestion of the glucose, right? So there is a glycogen. So normally glycogen is there. So how you will know that this is the bacilli or glycogen? Did you understand? How you know that this is bacilli or glycogen? Both are positive for the pass stain. Did you understand? Both will be positive. Remember, this pass stain is positive for the glycogen also. Pass stain is positive for the bacilli also. Right? So what we are going to do now, next step will be we will apply the diastase stain. So we will apply diastase. Diastase, this is the enzyme. What they will do? They will degrade the glycogen, or they will digest the glycogen. So they will degrade the glycogen. All the glycogen will be degraded. So when all the glycogen will be degraded, what is remaining? Bacteria will be remaining, because they will not be degraded. Remember, bacteria will be remaining. Why? Because bacilli are diastase resistant, right? So bacilli are diastase resistant. So that is why we will say that pass positive diastase resistant. Diastase resistant, because these are bacilli. Bacilli will be diastase resistant, and this will confirm the diagnosis of the Whipple's disease. This both diagram was the question in AIMS exam, right? So now you understood what is Whipple's disease. It is a malabsorption syndrome. Point number one: malabsorption syndrome with fatty stool. Second, it is caused by bacteria. What will be the site? Small intestine. When they will affect, what will happen? In the mucosa. In the mucosa, now you can see that in this mucosa they are full of macrophages. This is He stain. Remember, this is the He stain, and all these things are foamy macrophages. And this area is the lamina propria we are seeing. So lamina propria. So by seeing this only, I cannot confirm the diagnosis. Remember this point. By seeing He section, I cannot confirm the diagnosis. By seeing the history of the steatorrhea, malabsorption, and foamy macrophages, I have a assumption of the diagnosis that it can be a Whipple's disease. So what I will do, I will go for the next thing. And what is the next thing? Pass stain. So now you can see this is the pass stain. So as I told you, pass stain will be positive for glycogen. So what we are going to add? We are going to add diastase, because diastase will digest the glycogen, and resistant substances will be bacilli. So that is why this is the description for the bacilli. Right? So now you can see all these are bacilli. Whatever you are seeing, this all red color structure is bacilli, because all glycogen has been digested. So this is how you will identify pass positive diastase resistant Propionema whippleyi. Right? Is it clear to everyone? Can I see your thumbs up if you all understood? Yes, thank you very much. Very good, nice, ultimate. So nearly all everybody understood this. This is very good thing, right? So now you have to understand. We understood about the Whipple's disease. This is the another important area, right? Now we understood entamoeba also. Now come to the next question. Is there anything remaining in that thing? We finished this one. Giardiasis is answer. Celiac disease, already I have told you that there will be nothing specific on the biopsy, so it is ruled out, right? So now coming to the next question. So let us solve this question. Another question. This here I will tell you about the celiac disease, because many students were telling what about this, right? So this is the celiac disease. Histological features include all of the following except. Can you tell me the right answer for this question? Can you tell me the right answer for this question? What you will see in this celiac disease? Which is not seen. All are seen except, right? That is what it is written. So will you find, okay, I will ask you one by one, right? Will you find cryptic hyperplasia in celiac disease? Yes or no? Cryptic hyperplasia. Yes, there will be cryptic hyperplasia. Remember, it will be present. It will be present. Increase in thickness of the mucosa. Let us see later on. It will not be seen. Remember, this is the right answer. Remember, mucosal thickness remains same in case of celiac disease. So whenever you are talking about celiac disease, mucosal thickness will remain same, right? Why? I will tell you why it will remain same. See this. This is the villi, right? And this is the crypt. Villi and crypt. See what I'm showing you? This is the villi, right? And this is the crypt, right? So what happens in and I'm showing you this is the mucosal epithelium, right? So suppose this is the mucosal epithelium. So what happens in the uh, celiac disease? There will be villus atrophy. So now I'm showing you this is the atrophy of the villi. So villi is having atrophy. Villi is having atrophy. Remember, the amount of atrophy villi will be doing, the similar amount of cryptic hyperplasia will be there. So now you can say that this is the crypt hyperplasia. This is the crypt hyperplasia. Right? So did you understand? So what I'm showing you, what is the thickness? Thickness is still same. Thickness will be still same. That was the PGI and AIMS question. Remember? So increase in thickness of the mucosa is the wrong statement. Remember this point. Mucosal thickness will remain same in case of the celiac disease, right? So that point should be clear to everybody, right? Celiac disease, what you will see that here you will find the epithelium. Here you will find the epithelium, and these epithelial cells will be, suppose I'm just showing you, this is the bigger area to show the epithelium. Inside the epithelium, you will be seeing the lymphocytic infiltrate, right? There will be lymphocytic infiltrate, and this is intraepithelial lymphocytes. So that is what we have to remember, intraepithelial lymphocyte, and this is also called as lymphoepithelial lesion. Lymphoepithelial lesion. This is the PGI All India AIMS question. Lymphoepithelial lesion is seen in celiac disease, right? And what is the clinical significance? What is the clinical significance which examiner ask in exam, right? Clinical significance, whenever you find lymphoepithelial lesion, this is the risk for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Remember, this is the risk for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So this is for your life also. When you are working as a clinician and you are seeing a pathologist report, lymphoepithelial lesions are seen. It means you have to follow up that patient. That patient can be a future NHL case, right? So that is why we have to do. And this celiac disease is also a future NHL case, right? And see, the last point I wanted to tell, that increase in inflammatory cells. So right, obviously you are seeing all these inflammatory cells only, right? So yes, there will be increase in inflammatory cells. So now you got the answer. Answer is B. Right. Now coming to the point, lymphoepithelial lesion is there. Right. Lymphoepithelial lesion is there. So can you tell me which type of lymphoma is commonly seen in this celiac disease patient? What is the most common NHL in the celiac disease? Remember, this is the question in NEET exam. Celiac disease, most common non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. B cell or T cell? Very good. B cell or T cell? So these are T cell, which is called as enteropathy associated. Remember, enteropathy associated T cell lymphoma, right? So enteropathy associated T cell lymphoma will be there in the celiac disease, right? So celiac disease, we are using this one. What is celiac disease? I just wanted to tell you in brief, right? So celiac disease is also a malabsorption syndrome because of the gluten present in the cereals, right? So gluten diets. So what are these diets? We remember by mnemonic called BRO, right? Barley, rye, oat, and wheat. So these are the substances which will be causing celiac disease, right? So these are the substances which will be causing celiac disease, right? So why I said biopsy is non-diagnostic? Why I said biopsy is non-diagnostic? Because biopsy is non-specific. Biopsy will be non-specific. That is why it is non-diagnostic, right? So the question is how we can confirm the diagnosis of celiac disease. How to confirm diagnosis of the celiac disease? Remember, diagnosis of celiac disease can be confirmed by the history, serology, and endoscopic biopsy report. Endoscopic biopsy report. So all those what I have described, right? That villi atrophy, cryptic hyperplasia, they are not diagnostic, but they are part of diagnosis. Remember, they are part of diagnosis, and diagnosis can be done by three things: history, serology, and endoscopic biopsy. Right? History, serology, and endoscopic biopsy, which we should know. Right? So yes, you can eat rice and maize. It is not because of those things, right? So you can eat rice and maize, Sapna. You can eat rice and maize. If the patient is like that, you can allow him to eat those things, right? So they will be having history. So whenever they will be having no gluten, or you will be not giving all this gluten diet, then they will be free from this. It is only from those cereals which are having gluten. The cereal which is having gluten should not be given to them. So when you will stop that, this will stop this, right? When you will start this, then again they will have malabsorption, right? So Mahesh, you are asking how to confirm. Confirmation is multimodality approach. History, that is what I'm saying. History, serology, and endoscopic biopsy, all three things will be clubbed together, and then we can confirm the diagnosis, right? It is not only biopsy. That is what I wanted to tell. Serologically, you will get the two questions: what is the most sensitive test, and what is the most specific test, right? Most sensitive test is the IgA antibodies against the transglutaminase, against the transglutaminase. So this is the most sensitive test. Most specific will be anti-endomysial antibody. Anti-endomysial antibodies will be confirming the diagnosis, right? So most sensitive and most specific, these are the two important things which we have to remember, right? So I think it's clear to everyone, right? Most sensitive what is, and most specific what will be, right? So this is how we will confirm serological analysis. So positive history, serology plus endoscopic biopsy, multimodality approach should be used for confirmation of the diagnosis of the celiac disease, not the biopsy. Remember, this is the question multiple times in PGI exam. Remember, this is the multiple times it has been asked. Colonic biopsy will confirm the diagnosis, so that is the false statement, right? Now coming to the next question. Another beautiful MCQ which examiner may ask in future exam. Sensitivity and specificity difference. Anisha, I think you can ask this question to your PSM. Sensitivity means sensitive and specificity means specific. Means this will be highly specific, right? And detail you can ask your PSM professor. He will be telling you, right? So now I am going to tell you the next question. This question is about a 40-year-old male. You can see what is the history. Characteristic history is the multiple. He is having multiple antibiotics. Antibiotic history, pneumonia, sepsis, and now abdominal distension, bowel sound is gone, and abdominal radiograph is showing that ileus. Lab study shows leukocytosis, means there is a infection because of this sepsis. Hypoalbuminemia, laparotomy, distal ileum is cecum is resected. Histopathology of the and gross specimen is shown. You can see the gross, and this is the histopathology. Yes, Prashant, yes, yellowish exudate. Can you tell me what is the diagnosis here? Can you tell me what will be the diagnosis for this patient? Anybody? Yes, can you tell me the answer for this question? Can you tell me what should be the answer for this question? I'm just waiting for the poll for this question, right? What should be the answer? Very good. So 98% of you, means nearly everybody has said the right answer. It's not ulcerative colitis. They will not be presenting like this. Remember why they will not be presenting like this? There is a thing. Ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, they cannot be presenting. Crohn's disease, why not? Because Crohn's disease, you will see the granuloma, right? You will find the granuloma in Crohn's disease. Ulcerative colitis, you will not find any specific findings. So they are all non-specific finding. So which is not seen here, right? Right. And celiac disease, already we have discussed, biopsy is non-diagnostic, right? So what is remaining here? It is a case of pseudomembranous enterocolitis, right? So this is a pseudomembranous enterocolitis. You can see what is the history. History is saying of multiple antibiotics, right? And this is called antibiotic associated diarrhea, right? So yes, very good, Rishikesh. It is Clostridium difficile. Now I am showing you, this is the gross picture which we are seeing. So what is this gross picture we are seeing? This area is hyperemic, right? What I'm showing you, this area is hyperemic, where blood vessels will be or prominent or hemorrhage will be there. So this will be hyperemic because this is the older gross specimen. That is why it was looking pale, right? Because of the fixation, that color has been gone. But remember, this will be red color also. Hyperemic because blood vessel will be more, right? Congestion will be more. And now you can see what are these things. These are the yellow green exudates. These are the yellow green exudates, right? So when you find this kind of presentation, it means it is a pseudomembranous colitis. Pseudomembranous colitis. So what has happened in pseudomembranous colitis? Because that person was taking antibiotics, and remember, most commonly the cephalosporins are associated with this kind of. Cephalosporin has been given. They are most commonly associated with antibiotic associated diarrhea. So what they will do? They will damage the colonic microbiota, and because of that happen Clostridium difficile. Remember this Clostridium difficile, this bacterium, they will release their toxin, and because of this what will happen, there will be epithelial damage, right? Epithelial damage. So this epithelial damage, now you can see there is a epithelial damage. So all these are epithelial damage. Because of the epithelial damage only you are seeing there is a covering of the exudates, right? So that is the basic concept of the pseudomembranous colitis. What is happening when you are giving so much of the antibiotic, this microbiota is damaged. Now the Clostridium difficile, their toxin will be causing damage of the epithelium, right? So epithelium is the reason for the continuity, right? When epithelium is damaged, what will happen? Inflammatory cells, fibrin, pus, exudate, whatever you can say, this is coming outside, and now they will be covering the epithelium, as you can see here. As you can see here, because of the toxin induced damage, that epithelium is having no continuity, that is lost, and now inflammation and fibrin is coming and they are covering the cell. So inflammation and fibrin you will see on microscopy, right? But on the gross examination, inflammation neutrophil will be forming the yellow green exudate. Yellow green exudate, that is the gross finding. And when you are seeing the microscopic examination, look at this one, this is the microscopic examination. See, what is the, as I said, there will be rupture of the epithelium. Can you see? This is the rupture area. This is the rupture area. And you can see how the pink fibrin is coming outside. I'm marking this is the fibrin or fibrinopurulent exudate. This is the fibrin plus purulent exudate, right? Here also you can see there is a damage and they are coming like this. Here also you can see it is damaged and it is coming like this. Here also it is coming like this, right? So it is looking like as if there is a volcanic eruption is going on. So this is described as a mucosa is showing volcanic eruption, right? Volcanic eruption in the mucosal epithelial layer. So mucosal epithelial layer is showing volcanic eruption, and because of this eruption, what is happening? You are seeing the fibrinopurulent exudate or fibrinopurulent inflammation over mucosal epithelium, So this is how you describe number one, volcano-like eruption, and number two, fibrinopurulent inflammation over the mucosa. Remember, so that is how you will identify pseudomembranous colitis. So this is the beautiful correlation of the gross to the microscopy, right? So now you can see that why I said it's a beautiful correlation. Now you can see that what is happening here. Here also the same thing. As I said, epithelial continuity was lost, and now the inflammation is coming up along with the fibrin, which we are seeing in the biopsy. Volcanic eruption is there, fibrin is coming up, and now they are lying over the mucosal epithelial cells. So now you can see they are lying over the mucosal epithelial cell. This is the pseudomembranous colitis, right? Which is caused by the Clostridium difficile. And remember, it can be caused by other bacteria also, like Salmonella, Shigella, and even in ischemic bowel disease also you can see. Remember this point, this can be seen in ischemic bowel disease, but remember, most commonly it is associated with the Clostridium difficile. That is why I took the example of this one, right? So I hope this question is clear to everyone, right? Ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, I have already told you, ulcerative colitis will be having non-specific finding. Crohn's disease, you will be seeing the granuloma, which is not seen in this case. And celiac disease, already I have told you, biopsy is inconclusive, non-diagnostic, right? So the answer is pseudomembranous colitis. Now look at this one. This was the PGI question. Diffuse distribution of the pseudo polyp is seen in. What will be right answer here? Diffuse distribution of the pseudo polyp. Diffuse distribution of pseudo polyp. Very good. You all are giving the correct answer. It is ulcerative colitis. Diffuse distribution of pseudo polyp. Why it is called as pseudo polyp? See what I want to show you here. This is the cut section of the intestine. Suppose I am showing you this is the cut section area of the intestine, right? What is happening in both Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis? When you are seeing Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, right? Ulcerative colitis, there will be mucosal damage, which will be uniform mucosal damage. So what I am showing you, there is a mucosal damage. Because of this mucosal damage, they will have regeneration also. So who is getting regeneration? I'm just writing M for mucosa. So it is regeneration of mucosa only. That is why this is called as pseudo polyp. So mucosa will regenerate and they will form the nodule, and this will be called as pseudo polyp. Pseudo polyp. So pseudo polyp will be seen in ulcerative colitis, right? But remember, only mucosa, right? Very good, Prashant. It is having only mucosal bridge. That is why it is called as pseudo polyp, right? So they are having only mucosa. In true polyps, all four layers will be there. Remember this point. That is why I am explaining. True polyp, all four layers will be absent. But it is pseudo polyp because only mucosal epithelial cells will be present in this polyp, right? Now, if you look at the appearance of the Crohn's disease, in Crohn's disease, you will be seeing some normal areas, then some affected areas, then some normal areas, then some affected area. This is called skip lesions. This is called skip lesion. So here also mucosa will regenerate and they will be forming pseudo polyp. So here also you are seeing pseudo polyp. But how is the pseudo polyp distribution? Skip lesion. So they are scattered in between. Normal area will be there, right? So remember this point. Pseudo polyps are seen in both Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. Make a note of this thing. But when examiner is asking, can you see the language? Diffuse distribution of the pseudo polyp, right? Language is the key. Diffuse. He's not telling there is a patchy distribution of the pseudo polyp. If they say patchy distribution of the pseudo polyp, then you will think about Crohn's disease, right? So now your answer is ulcerative colitis, right? So diffuse distribution of pseudo polyp will be seen in this one. Now there was a question in PGI exam. Pseudo polyp is a risk for malignant transformation. True or false? Is this pseudo polyp a risk for malignant transformation? False statement. Very good. Remember, pseudo polyps are never pre-malignant. Never pre-malignant, right? Pseudo polyps are never pre-malignant. Wherever you see inflammatory bowel disease or any inflammatory infection causing the pseudo polyp, they are not a malignant precursor. So remember this point. In both cases, pseudo polyp is not associated with any malignancy. That is the question asked in PGI exam, right? Now coming to the this picture, can you tell me what is this gross specimen? It is inflammatory bowel disease, right? It's a spotter. Can you see this is the normal area? Can you see this is the normal area? But can you see this area? Can you see this area? What I'm marking here in between these two lines? Very good. That is the Crohn's disease, right? This is the affected area. This is the affected area. So this is the picture of Crohn's disease, right? So that is how a gross picture can be asked you in your exam. Remember, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. These gross specimens are very, very important. Examiner can ask this question as it is, and I'm asking you identify this gross specimen of the intestine, like that examiner will be asking, right? Now look at this one. Can you tell me what is this inflammatory bowel disease? Can you see this is the entire, can you notice entire mucosa is having pseudo polyp, right? So this is diffuse distribution, what I was telling you in that question. This is the diffuse distribution of the pseudo polyp, and this is the ulcerative colitis, right? Identify this one. Can you tell me what is this structure? This is the Crohn's disease patient, and can you tell me what is this? Now I'll just explain you what is this, right? Can you see this is the edematous mucosa? This is the edematous mucosa, right? Edematous mucosa. So what I'm showing you, there is a edematous mucosa, and in between edematous mucosa, what you are observing, there is a ulcer. In between edematous mucosa, there is a ulcer. You can see these are the linear or serpiginous ulcers. So you can see these are the linear ulcers. So because of this thing, edematous mucosa plus ulcer in between, right? Ulcer in between is giving a cobblestone appearance, right? So it is linear. Yes, it is a linear and deep ulcer. It is linear and deep ulcer, and because of this, it is also called as cobblestone appearance, right? Cobblestone appearance. So remember, cobblestone appearance is seen in Crohn's disease. Cobblestone appearance is seen in Crohn's disease. Why they are having cobblestone? Because of the two things: edematous mucosa and in between the linear and deep ulcers, right? So these are the Crohn's disease patients showing cobblestone appearance. Now look at this one. In this picture, can you see? Can you tell me what is this diagnosis? This was previous year AIMS question, but that was the radiology question. And now I am showing you the gross of that radiology. Now look at this lumen. Now look at this lumen. See here, lumen is this thick. Lumen is this thick, right? It is going like this. Till now, lumen is thick like this. But here onwards, what you are noticing, lumen is very thin like this. Right now, you can see lumen is very thin. Why lumen has become thin? Can you see what is this whitish area? These are the areas where you are seeing white fibrosis. Why there is a fibrosis? Because of severe inflammation, right? Inflammatory cells will be releasing the fibrogenic cytokine, and that is causing fibrosis. And because of the fibrosis, there is a narrowing of the lumen. So now can you see there is a narrowing of the lumen in this area? Here lumen is wider. Lumen is wider. Here lumen is narrow. So this is called as a string sign of Cantor. A string sign of Cantor is seen in Crohn's disease. Previous year AIMS question, right? A string sign of Cantor. Now you can see this is the barium study, right? This is the barium study. You can see here it is the normal width. Here you can see normal lumen, but here you can see there is a thin line, right? So this is again the string sign. This was the question in previous year AIMS exam. So this is the same thing, string sign of Cantor, right? So this is seen in Crohn's disease, right? So remember this point, it's a Crohn's disease, a string sign of Cantor. Why it is there? Now you understood. See, in radiology, if you are seeing, you might not be understanding, but see, but once you know the concept, why Crohn's disease will be having this thing? Because they are having severe inflammation, because all four layers, transmural involvement, so all the layers will be affected, all will be having inflammation. Because of inflammation there will be more fibrosis, and that fibrosis, what will happen, slowly they will narrow down the lumen, and they will be like a string. That is why it is called as string sign. As you can see here, lumen is wider, lumen is narrower. So this is called a string sign because of the fibrosis, which is causing the narrowing of the lumen, right? Now I am showing you, this is the ulcerative colitis, especially when they are chronic and involving the colonic areas, right? Because colons, if you see, normal colon will be having haustrations like this, right? So these are the normal haustrations. Because of the mucosal thickening, there will be haustrations. So this is the normal finding, right? But because of the chronic ulcerative colitis, right, because of the chronic ulcerative colitis, there will be loss of haustrations. So there will be loss of haustrations. So haustrations are the feature of the colon. That is why it is written as a featureless colon. Now there is no feature, featureless colon is seen. So this featureless colon you are seeing here. Can you see here? There is some haustration, but in this area there is no haustration. Can you see? There is a without haustration. You can see this area is there, right? This area is there. So this is why it is called as lead pipe. So lead pipe will be looking like this. This is called lead pipe deformity, right? So lead pipe deformity is because of loss of haustration seen in chronic ulcerative colitis. Remember, in chronic ulcerative colitis, you will see lead pipe haustrations, right? Or lead pipe deformity, right? So this is the ulcerative colitis. Now look at this question. This was the AIMS 2018 MCQ. Read this question and tell me the answer. What should be the answer for this question? 45-year-old male, right? Bloody diarrhea, geographical ulcer on colonic examination, right? Biopsy is here, histopathology is here, rule of 5 is there in your hand, and you can see rule of 5. Remember, that is why I always say that rule of 5 is very important. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the central area when you will focus what you are looking at here. Can you see this? What are these cells? Can you notice these cells are having multinucleated giant cell? What are these? Multinucleated giant cell. So once you find multinucleated giant cell, that's all. Game is over. It is not adenocarcinoma. It is not. It can be Crohn's disease, right? It cannot be a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It cannot be a pseudomembranous colitis, right? So it is Crohn's disease. Right answer is Crohn's disease. Remember this important thing. It is a Crohn's disease. So here I would like to tell you important point about the Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. Remember, these are inflammatory bowel disease where you will see a patient will be having a classical presentation. In between, he will be normal, right? Then after a few weeks or few months, he will be having mucoid, bloody, diarrhea. This will be the class C presentation you will see in your clinic when you will be working as a clinician. You will see that patient will be telling, sir, whenever I go for the trip, I will be having this problem, and I'm having colicky abdominal pain, and the diarrhea I'm having is the mucoid bloody diarrhea, right? It will be having mucus, and this is having blood also. And but when I'm having no stress, I'm having relaxation, then I'm having fine. So in between there will be normalcy, and they will be having mucoid bloody diarrhea. So that will be the feature of these two conditions, right? Now coming to the Crohn's disease versus ulcerative colitis on the microscopic examination, right? When you are seeing this, remember there are four layers: mucosa, submucosa, muscularis propria, and serosa, right? So these are the four layers, right? Crohn's disease is the transmural involvement, means all four layers will be having damage. So Crohn's disease, you will see transmural ulcer, all four layers are damaged. Whereas ulcerative colitis, you will be having mucosa and submucosa involvement only, right? So this will be having mucosa and submucosal involvement only. Why I wanted to draw this diagram, so that you can understand. Surya, I will explain you that rule of five in the next image, right? There are five areas we see in this slide. I will explain you in the next image when it will come, right? So in Crohn's disease, there is a transmural ulcer, plus they will be having granuloma, right? So they will be having granuloma. So this is the important point we have to remember for the Crohn's disease, which we are seeing in that diagram. Fine, right? So here you are seeing the granuloma, transmural ulcer is there, right? And now I want to say that ulcerative colitis, there is nothing specific, right? And can you tell me where you will be seeing more perforation, more septicemia? By seeing this histology, can you say clinically who will be having more perforation? Very good, right? So that is why there is more perforation, more septicemia, more complication in the Crohn's disease. But remember one thing: when examiner asks about the malignant transformation, then remember Crohn's disease is less in comparison to the ulcerative colitis, right? Ulcerative colitis will be having higher chances of the malignant transformation, right? So after seeing this, now I'm going to show you this picture. See, what is rule of five, Surya? Rule of five means you have to look for the five areas in this slide. Whenever slide is given in your exam, right? Whenever image based picture is coming, so five areas are the four corners: one, two, three, four, and fifth area is the center of the slide. So these are the five areas we have to see. This is my rule of five, which I used to follow, and this is, remember, this is a very important thing or trick to solve the image based question in pathologies, in pathology image based questions especially, right? So you are looking for the five areas, then you observe, this is the second one, then you compare, right? So we are seeing five areas: one, two, three, four, five. When I came to fifth area, I noticed there are giant cell, there are giant cell. So now you can see there are so many giant cells are there. So these are all giant cell. Once I see the giant cell, what I will think, it is a granulomatous inflammation, right? It can be TB also, it can be Crohn's disease also, right? It can be TB also, it can be Crohn's disease also. So how to differentiate it is a Crohn's disease? It will be solely based on this history, where examiner will be giving history that he is having mucoid bloody diarrhea. And remember, this will be not continuous, this will be intermittent, right? So intermittent mucoid bloody diarrhea will favor the Crohn's disease, and that was actual question in AIMS exam, right? AIMS exam, TB was also option which was given, right? TB was also option which was given. So that is how we are going to rule out. In TB you will be having not this kind of presentation. Intermittent mucoid bloody diarrhea will be feature of the Crohn's disease, right? Yes, Langhans giant cell. It is not. Yes, Langhans giant cell can be seen. Yes, it seen. Caseating, non-caseating is not very important here at this current scenario. But if you are asking in case of Crohn's disease, yes, they will be having non-caseating granuloma. But remember, TB also has non-caseating granuloma. Don't think that TB do not have non-caseating granulomas, right? Thank you, Surya, for understanding. Now we are going to check the another question. This is the also AIMS question, and my gut feeling says this question is again going to come in your exam, right? Look at the question: 55-year-old male, right? And give me the answer. What should be the answer for this question? right? So 65-year-old male, GI polyp, biopsy is there, histological examination is shown. Can you tell me what will be the diagnosis in this particular case? Can you tell me? Very good, Prashant. Ultimate. You are giving the ultimate explanation for this picture. So can you tell me what will be right answer? Yes, very good. Majority of you have identified this easy question, right? This is the easy question. Hyperplastic polyp, right? This is the hyperplastic polyp. Hyperplastic polyp, how you will identify? See this. These are the three pictures. One, two, and three. Why I have made these three pictures? You can see glands. All these lumens are glands, right? As I have told you. So in this picture, I am showing you there is a glandular hyperplasia. Point one. Glandular hyperplasia. In this picture, this one is showing glandular hyperplasia. This is the second picture. Second picture, what I am showing you, within the gland, there is a epithelial hyperplasia. Epithelial hyperplasia, right? So you can see there are so many epithelial cells in the gland, right? So many epithelial cells. So there is a epithelial hyperplasia here, right? Number three, this diagram, because of the epithelial hyperplasia, when you are having a overview of the gland from the above, it is looking like a star shape or serrated margin of the glandular epithelium. So what I am saying you, star shape or serrated margin. So a star shape or serrated margin of the gland, right? Of the gland is the characteristic, or you can say diagnostic finding of the hyperplastic polyp, right? So this is hyperplastic polyp. So you can see what is happening, hyperplasia. What is happening, epithelial hyperplasia. What is glandular hyperplasia? What is epithelial hyperplasia? So because of the glandular hyperplasia and epithelial hyperplasia, and second thing, this cell will not die very fast, so they will survive. That is why they are getting accumulated, and because of this accumulation they are giving the characteristic star shape. Remember, this is the catch point, serrated or star shape appearance. No starry sky, Mahesh, it is not starry sky, don't get confused. Not starry sky is for, starry sky is for either PSGM or it is for Burkitt lymphoma. Not here, it is the serrated or star shape, right? Because of the mucosal epithelial hyperplasia, right? So now we can see this is the hyperplastic. So this is how you are seeing in all of them, they are having hyperplasia, right? You can see there is a lumen is hyperplasia. You can see so many goblet cells are there. These are mucin filled vacuoles only, right? So answer is hyperplastic polyp. Why not tubular adenoma? Why not tubulovillous adenoma? Why not villous adenoma? Right? So now I will show you these diagrams also so that you can understand. See what you are seeing when you will see the gross examination of the tubular adenoma. This is the tubular adenoma. They will be having as like this. This is the gross examination, which is described as a mushroom like. Now when you will take the section from here, can you see this is the gross specimen, right? Now we are taking the section and we are examining on the microscopic examination. You can see they are corresponding to the mushroom only. That is the beauty of this gross and microscopy. So that is how in pathology, when you associate things, you will be having more clarity about the things, right? And in these, what you are seeing, all these glands are looking like this, right? You can see all these are looking like this, which are the tubular arrangement. So they are looking like a tubules. So this is called the tubular. That is why it is called as tubular adenoma. Remember, this is the most common type of the adenoma. Most common type of the adenoma. So most common adenoma, tubular, villus, tubulovillus. There are three things, right? So this is the tubular adenoma, right? So it's clear. Now you can see what is this. If you look at this, what you are finding, they are very, very big. You can see their appearance is like this. In simple words, I want to show you like this. So they are like a finger. They are like a villi. They are like a villi. That is why this is called as villus adenoma. Villus adenoma. Remember, villus adenoma will be sessile. You cannot see the branching here. You cannot see that stalk here, right? Stalk will not be present. So they are flat and finger-like projections will be there. So when you are seeing a finger-like projections like this, it means it is a villus adenoma. right? So this is the villus adenoma. And remember, this villus adenoma is having most common malignant transformation among all the adenomatous polyp. Most common malignant transformation will be, most commonly malignant transformation will be seen in the villus adenoma, right? This is important MCQ, we have to remember, right? So now you understood. Can you see here, it is tubule, mushroom shape, tubular adenoma, right? Here you are seeing finger like projection, so these are the villus adenoma. And when you are seeing both, can you see, this is the finger like and this is the tubular appearance, right? So both are there. So this is the tubulovillus adenoma, right? So tubulovillus adenoma. So this is how you will identify tubulovillus adenoma, right? So now it is clear. So all these are adenomatous polyp. Remember, adenomatous polyp is the most common benign polyp in our human body, right? And there are three types: tubular, villus, tubulovillus. And out of these three, tubular is most common. Out of these three, most common malignant transformation, villus will be showing, right? These are important MCQs which we should remember, right? Now come to the next question. Look at this MCQ. After seeing this diagram, I think you need not to see this also, and you can tell the diagnosis. Can you tell me what will be the diagnosis here? I am waiting for your answer in this poll. 18-year-old boy, abdominal pain, melena. Clinical radiological examination has revealed the finding consistent with intussusception. Enterotomy was done, nodule was removed, and it is shown here. Clinical finding is there. Now you can see what is it. Very good. It is a Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, a classical feature of the Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, which you are seeing mucocutaneous hyperpigmentation. Can you see mucocutaneous hyperpigmentation as a macules? And here you are seeing the hyperplasia, and I will tell you what is this later on. But let us imagine that this is the Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. So can you tell me one by one what will be the answer for this? You all have told the right answer, that is the C option, mutation in the STK11 gene. Remember, this is the right answer in case of Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, you will see the mutation which is called as LKB1 STK11, right? So this is the gene where you will be having mutation. This is the gene where you will be having mutation, that is the Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, right? Now I want to ask you a question, because these are some of the MCQs which examiner had asked. What about the option A? What about the option A, where you will see P10 gene mutation? Can you tell me? This was the NEET question in 2018. P10 mutation will be seen in, very good, P10 mutation will be seen in Cowden syndrome. Cowden syndrome and Banyan-Ruvalcaba. Remember, Banyan-Ruvalcaba syndrome. They see, try to understand what I am saying. Cowden syndrome clinical feature, Banyan-Ruvalcaba clinical feature. Both will be having GI polyp. Both will be having some problem with the head, means the brain. One will be having developmental malformation. Banyan-Ruvalcaba will be having developmental malformation. Cowden syndrome will be having macrocephaly, right? So what scientists, they found that they have the spectrum of the disorder. They are not the different disorder. What they found out later on, they are the spectrum of the disorder. So Cowden syndrome is one spectrum, Banyan-Ruvalcaba is one spectrum, and both the spectrum is having common thing which is called as P10 mutation, and that is why it is also called as P10 hamartoma syndrome. P10 hamartoma syndrome. Remember, this is the question in NEET PG exam, so it can be again repeated in future exams. So Cowden syndrome, Banyan-Ruvalcaba syndrome, they are the spectrum of the disorder with common mutation, which is called as P10 gene mutation. That was the question in exam, and that will be again asked in your future exam, maybe the AIMS question. But remember, here it is not any diagnostic finding on the biopsy. That is why I'm not showing. Right now, the second thing, this was also the question in NEET PG 2016. Right, this is seen in which condition? Can you tell me? SMAD4 mutation is the most common gene mutation in which polyp? Very good. Very nice, Naveen. This is the exact answer which I wanted. It is juvenile polyp. Remember, juvenile polyp. Juvenile polyp. Most common mutation is the SMAD4 gene mutation. Right. So most common mutation in juvenile polyp is the SMAD4 mutation. Adenomatous polyposis coli is seen in familial adenomatous polyposis. Right. So these are the things we have discussed here. Right. Now come and look at this one. What we are seeing in the Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. Peutz-Jeghers syndrome is favorite for AIMS. So examiner can ask any question. Usually they will be children, right? And in this, if you look at the clinical feature, what we are seeing here is the mucocutaneous hyperpigmentation, right? So what I'm showing you, mucocutaneous hyperpigmentation. This hyperpigmentation will be in the form of macule, and where you will find. So remember, here I'm showing you the oral cavity, but you can see in the mucosa also, right? So perioral areas, mucosa, even perinasal areas, and even in perianal areas also. Perianal and genital area also you can find this, right? So why I'm saying, because sometime examiner will be giving history of the perianal or perigenital. So that time also you should remember that these hyperpigmented macules can be present in all these areas, right? Hyperpigmented macule can be present in all these areas, and that is characteristic of the Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, right? So when you are seeing this patient and he is having polyp, you have resected the polyp and you are seeing the biopsy. So how you will identify this Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, right? So what I am showing you, this is the gland, right? In this gland, you can see this gland. Actually, this is the lamina propria of the intestine, right? In this lamina propria, what you are seeing, these are the hyperplastic glands. See what I'm showing you, these are, you can see so many tiny spaces are there. So hyperplasia of the gland is there. So there is a hyperplasia of mucosal epithelial cell, right? So because of the hyperplasia of mucosal epithelial cell, we are seeing like this, right? So now your mind might be wondering that why not it is a hematomata syndrome, right? So what is the difference? Because of the is this smooth muscle hyperplasia, what you are seeing, this is the one point. Second point, what you are seeing, that within this you can see these are all the glands, there is a hyperplasia, all the glands, there is a hyperplasia, and between the glands you can see these are the smooth muscles which are going, right? These are the smooth muscles which are going within the hyperplastic glands. So because of these smooth muscles which are going within the glands, they are giving a tree like appearance. Can you see, this is looking like a tree, this is looking like a tree. So that is why it is called as arborization of smooth muscles within hyperplastic hyperplastic glandular epithelium will confirm the diagnosis of the Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, right? So now you understood what I am showing you in this diagram. There is a hyperplasia of the gland because of the glandular epithelial hyperproliferation. And why this is looking like a tree? Because of the smooth muscles are intersecting them. Remember, this is the characteristic diagnostic finding. When you are seeing the gland and smooth muscles are intersecting, that is the reason for the glandular appearance, and this is called as Peutz-Jeghers syndrome's diagnostic finding, right? So this is the Peutz-Jeghers syndrome diagnostic finding. Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, actually, it is not a it itself is not a pre-malignant lesion, right? It itself is not a pre-malignant region, but it is a risk for pancreas, thyroid, and breast cancer, right? Why I wanted to write this? This was the question in previous year AIMS exam. Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, which polyp is strongly associated with pancreatic adenocarcinoma? Which polyp is strongly associated with pancreatic adenocarcinoma? Answer will be Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. Remember this point. It is one of the very, very important etiology for the development of pancreatic adenocarcinoma. You will read in the pancreatic adenocarcinoma when you will read Robbins, right? So that is the line examiner has taken from there. Pancreatic adenocarcinoma, they are strongly associated with Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, right? So this is how you will identify. Now you understood. Can you show you your thumbs up? maculopapular, macular hyperpigmentation, like this you can see, and then arborization of the smooth muscles within the hyperplastic gland is the diagnostic finding of the Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. Strongest association with the cancer pancreas, right? Fine. Now look at this question. This is another beautiful question. Here, I can assure you what my gut feeling says, that this is another important topic which can come in this AIMS or PGI exam, right? So can you tell me your answer for this question? This is a female patient which is 45-year-old, upper GI pain, tarry stool because of the melena, right? Bloody, there is a hemorrhage and bloody stool will be there, which will be having the black color appearance, tarry appearance. Upper endoscopy is showing firm, smooth, yellow, submucosal ulcerated mass. Gastroscopic biopsy reveals the spindle cell. Oh my God, hint has been given. Vacuolated cytoplasm, and the mass was removed. Now you can see the specimen. Can you tell me? Very good, very nice. Everybody is, I think you all are very well prepared for the AIMS exam. So answer is the gastrointestinal stromal tumor, right? What is the characteristic finding you are seeing here is the spindle cell, right? Spindle cell, and what are there? You can see all these are spindle cells. All these are spindle cells, right? All these are spindle cells, and there are vacuoles also. So that is what examiner is writing in the history itself. It is given spindle cell, vacuoles. So this is the feature of gastrointestinal stromal tumor, right? Gastric adenocarcinoma, as already I have told you, you will see the glandular pattern, which is not seen here, right? Gastric lymphoma, you will be seeing lymphocytic infiltrate, which will be atypical, which will be not like this. I will show you the exact diagram how it will be looking like, right? Squamous cell carcinoma, again I have told you, they will be having keratin pearls, and that is also not seen here, right? So it is a GIST. GIST is a tumor which is seen in 40 to 60-year-old patient, and they present with the bloody diarrhea or abdominal pain, right? So these are the two characteristic presentation: abdominal pain or bloody diarrhea. And these tumor, they arise from, GIST arise from interstitial cells of the Kajal. Interstitial cells of Kajal, right? So interstitial cells of Kajal will be the origin, which is also known as pacemaker of the GIT. Remember, examiner asked this question, pacemaker of GIT, because it will help in peristalsis. So from here it will be arising, and tumor mass will be located in muscularis propria, right? Which we are seeing here in this tumor, right? So this is how it will be looking like, a spindle shaped tumor. So basically, they are spindle shape is the most common type of the histological variety, right? So spindle shape GIST is most common variety, and for this kind of biopsy, when you have to confirm the diagnosis, you will go for c-KIT mutation, right? c-KIT mutation, and there is a platelet derived growth factor receptor alpha mutation. So these are the two mutations which are causing the cancer. But what has happened, some of the GIST will be having this mutation, and it will be difficult to identify them. So now there is a recent advances of this IHC where they have include both of them, and this IHC monoclonal antibody is called as DOG1, designed only for GIST. Remember, this is the monoclonal antibody. This is the monoclonal antibody, and now this is the investigation of choice to confirm. This was the NEET 2014 MCQ. It is very old question. NEET 2014, this was the asked question, right? So remember, GIST can be confirmed by DOG1, designed only for GIST. DOG1 stands for designed only for GIST. These are the monoclonal antibodies which has been designed only for the GIST, which will be covering both the aspects, c-KIT also and this mutation also. That is why I said this is the investigation of choice to confirm the diagnosis of the GIST, right? So that was the GIST tumor. Now coming to this last, I think this is the last one. Yes, this is the last tumor which I am showing you. Last slide, you can see 55-year-old, facial flushing history, GI pain, diarrhea. Can you tell me what you're thinking after seeing this gross finding? What is this microscopic finding, and what is this electron microscopic finding? Gross, light microscopy, electron microscopy. Yes, very good. So this is a case of carcinoid, right? This is the case of carcinoid. Now I will tell you what are the things we are seeing in this carcinoid specimen. It is very important because JIPMER also they had asked very many questions from here. See this, what happens here, what is happening here in this biopsy, in this gross examination. If you look at this, where is the tumor mass? Where is the tumor mass? This is the tumor mass. See, what I want to say that flushing of the face, diarrhea, all these things are suggestive of the carcinoid, right? So clinically carcinoid, right? And when you are seeing this specimen here, gross specimen, how is the carcinoid specimen? It will be tan brown appearance. Why it is tan brown? Because of the lipofuscin. That is the older PGI question, and this is the recently asked question in the JIPMER exam. Why carcinoid gross is brown in color? That is because of the brown pigment called as lipofuscin, right? So that is because of lipofuscin, right? Now we will take section from here and we will analyze. When you will take section from here, now you can see, if you have attended my YouTube session in the Unacademy, you would have seen I was telling in one day that neuroendocrine tumors. What is the characteristic of any neuroendocrine tumor? Because carcinoid is also a neuroendocrine tumor, right? Carcinoid is also a neuroendocrine tumor. So any neuroendocrine tumor will be having two characteristic finding. Number one, nucleus will be having salt, pepper, chromatin. This is the fine stippling, right? This fine stippling, in simple words we say fine stippling, and pathologist will be using the word salt, pepper, chromatin. Salt, pepper, chromatin, right? So salt, pepper, chromatin will be there, or stippled nuclei will be there, right? So this is number one characteristic of any neuroendocrine tumor, right? Number two, when you will see the cytoplasm, you will be finding a neurosecretory granule. This was the previous year AIMS question also. Neurosecretory granules will be there. But remember, we cannot see neurosecretory granule like this as I'm showing you in this diagram. This is the just diagrammatic representation, right? Neurosecretory granules you can see only on the electron microscopy, right? So these are the two findings. Any neuroendocrine tumor will have two findings, which I have shown you here. One is the fine stippling, second is the neurosecretory granule. So here you can see neurosecretory granules we cannot appreciate. As I said, it can be seen only by electron microscopy, right? What I am showing you here, which you can appreciate, is the fine stippling of the nuclear chromatin. So salt, pepper, chromatin is very, very prominently visible here, right? So when you are seeing tan brown gross, salt, pepper, chromatin, and then you are seeing a electron microscopy. This was the AIMS question. In this electron microscopy, what you are observing, these are the dark granules. These are the dark granules, and you can see it's very dark. If you see, this is also black color, but this is homogeneous black color, and that is why it is described as a dense core granules. So neurosecretory granules on electron microscopy, they are described as a dense core granule. Remember, what is this? Neurosecretory granules. So neurosecretory granules are described as a dense core granule, and what they will be having? What they will be having? They will be having the ISC markers, chromogranin. They will be having chromogranin, which was All India question 2017. They will be having synaptophysin, right? They will be having bombesin, another neat question, right? So chromogranin, synaptophysin, bombesin, neurofilament, all these are the ISC marker which will be located inside this neurosecretory granule. So whatever you are seeing, this black structure, why they are black? Because they are full of these markers. Remember, these are full of these markers, right? These are full of these markers. That is why looking dense black in color, and this is called dense core granule, right? In older All India exam, they had asked one question, neuroblastoma, what is the characteristic electron microscopic finding? And this is the answer, neurosecretory granules or dense core granule. That was the answer, right? So why I'm saying this, at that time AIMS people used to frame All India exam, right? They had asked this question because neuroblastoma is a neuroendocrine tumor. Neuroblastoma is a neuroendocrine. Pheochromocytoma is a neuroendocrine tumor. Small cell cancer of lung is a neuroendocrine tumor. All neuroendocrine tumor will be having dense core granule. Neuroblastoma, pheochromocytoma, carcinoid, small cell cancer of the lung, and all will be having these things in their granule, which will be looking like a dense core granule. So that is why I said now you will remember 3 points for the any neuroendocrine tumor. On light microscopy, salt paper chromatin. On electron microscopy, you will be seeing the dense core granule, and light microscopy, when you will be seeing the, when you will be expert, then you can observe the deep eosinophilic granular neurosecretory granule in the cytoplasm, right? So 3 points you have to remember, right? As I said, 3 points you have to remember for any neuroendocrine tumor: salt paper chromatin, neurosecretory granule, and dense core granule on the electron microscopy, right? So it's clear, everybody. Now we will move to the next slide. This is the slide I have kept just to make you understand how will be the lymphoma seen in GIT. So lymphoma GIT, you will see now, you can see all these are lymphocytic infiltrate, right? And these are atypical because they will be having prominent nucleoli, they will be having mitotic figure, right? So lymphocytic infiltrate will be there, so that will be the NHL. So can you tell me in simple words what is the most common NHL in entire GIT? Most common non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in entire GIT. Remember, it is diffuse large B cell lymphoma is more commoner than maltoma. Don't think about maltoma. This is outdated now. It is DLBL which is most common nowadays, right? It is DLBL which is most common nowadays. Remember this point. DLBL is the most common NHL of the intestine. Some exception you have to remember, that celiac disease. You remember celiac disease is the enteropathy associated T cell lymphoma. And what is this? Diffuse large B cell lymphoma, right? So remember all these things. Remember all these things. This is how examiner will be asking. Celiac disease, what is most common? T cell enteropathy associated, right? Most common overall. In GIT, most common overall lymphoma will be diffuse large B cell lymphoma, right? Now look at this one. This picture, you can see these are the lumen, right? What I have told you in the beginning when I was talking about the glandular cancers. Lumen is there, and you can see the tumor cells are there, right? So these are the adenocarcinomas. These are the adenocarcinomas of the intestine, right? So now we have discussed, I think I have covered majority of the important topics with some important points also, right? And again, I will tell you, keep revising all these things. I'm telling you, from here you will definitely get 1 or 2 questions in your coming AIMS exam, and PGI exam you'll be getting many more questions because there will be multiple options, right? So surely some question will be coming. So thank you for all your cooperation and coming. Yes, somebody is asking, what is this? Why is the tarry stool in the gist? Very good. So tarry stool, I have said there is a melena, right? There is a melena because of the bleeding from the tumor mass. So in GIT, tumor mass will bleed, and that will be giving melena, and that melena will be giving tarry stool. Mahesh, is it clear? Yes. Great. So now it's clear. So thank you so much for all your wishes, all your greetings, which I used to see that. Sir, your sentence will come true in AIMS. Yes, Prashant, definitely. With God's grace, it will come true, and definitely it will help you. Not only the AIMS exam, in your when you will be working as a clinician, some of the points you will be definitely remembering in your life also, right? Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone. Good night. Take care.